We back.
And we are back indeed.
Wonderful. Good to catch up again, Sarah.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes, for sure. William, I think today we will start on the second part of the third episode, part two. And then I guess it's a question of diving in by way of introduction. My name is Sorrel, and welcome to the Critical Video Podcast, part two for Soundstage and imaging. And William, on yourself.
William from AV News and Sorrel's sidekick in this. I must stress I'm very much the passenger in this journey. Sorrel is how did I refer to you the other day? To put this politely. Sorrel the sea monster, but the technical sea monster.
Yeah, I did go to AV News, and I did read your editorial there, and
am I blushing a little?
Kind of, but that's all good.
Caught in the web of my own weaving. But yeah, and when we say critical video, it's a video about critical listening.
Yes, it's all about the audio. The title should reflect that. When we get there.
We were chatting on quite a considerably more complicated topic than may first appear, and the first episode has dealt with the first version or the first chunk of sound staging, and today we're going to get into the second chunk of sound staging.
Absolutely.
Fantastic.
Basically, this part, the second half, is where we really get into the bolts and nuts of what sound staging is, how it actually works, why we've made some of the statements, well, not the royal we, I guess, why I have made certain statements, and I guess this is the time to back them up with facts. So let's get right into episode 3, part 2.
Fantastic.
So on the human ear, the structure of the pinna of the outer lobes of our ears and the external part of the ear canal. So the ear canal is split by the eardrum and the external and the internal part. And the external part of the ear canal and the pinna form a direction selective filter. So it's a broadband filter which assists the reception, our ears hearing the sound, receiving the sound and pressure waves of all the various frequencies, channeling it into the inner or the outside ear canal at least, and that forms this direction selective filter. I'll pop up the same green graph again that I referred to the last time, and that has a certain bandwidth. And all the frequencies below that bandwidth frequency is cut off, and everything above that frequency is cut off. Now, once again, I refer to the width and the height of our ear, the pinna, the outer ear lobes, and that plays a direct role in what that bandwidth frequency is, and it's a moving window. At the same time, in parallel, there are multiple windows of that nature, with a center frequency and obviously that the high and the low end cutoff filters or cutoff frequencies for that band pass filter, because that's really what it is a band pass filter. All it means is it allows whatever frequencies is inside the pass band, the part that will go through, it'll allow that, but it cuts the frequencies on the outside. Now, that is depending on the input direction on the horizontal plane. So when in the front or the side or the back the sound comes from, that filter influences the response and all the nulls and the peaks, the different phases, the diffractions, the reflections of all the sound to the inside of our ear. And in combination, those things causes certain patterns in the sound that enters the ear canal and hits the eardrum. And that is what our brains use to be able to understand this horizontal and vertical plane. Now, remember, this is not about the volume, because the volume is just about distance. The volume doesn't materially affect this direction selective filtering that our outer ear structures causes. And the reason why that happens is to allow, we've developed like that to allow our brain to interpret all this pressure information and wave information we are receiving. Hence, if a sound is off to one side, the right hand ear, if it's to your left, the right hand ear at a certain angle where it's moved to the left will be in that acoustical shadow, and now all sorts of other things will happen. It is also frequency dependent. So for the various frequency pass bands, there are different types of cues that we use. Some of it is phase based, some of it is purely timing based, depending on what the frequencies are, as we discussed in the first half of this episode. So the only way we can really evaluate where the sound originates from is to be able for our outer ear structures to cause all of these artifacts that hit our eardrum so that we can interpret all that information. Our brains are sophisticated and fast enough for audio that it is possible for us to do exactly that.
It's quite a staggering amount of processing that's actually taking place in relatively short periods of time. As you say, there's a degree of it that's learned. In other words, our brains are trained,
yes,
to interpret this. And you know, I think it goes back to what we were saying originally. What we're doing here is we're not saying it's right or wrong. We're just saying what is. And,
exactly.
And what we hear, as we said, is entirely our own experience.
Yes.
And I'm starting to get a sense of just why these things are subjective. Yes, they're general truths that we're able to discern, and this, and that, and the next thing. But when it comes down to the specific nuances of what we're actually hearing, the physics is one thing. Our shared experiences may take us to different places. It's
completely different.
Absolutely fascinating. I think it's just an incredible insight into the mechanics of what is actually going on, and our brains, we don't often give them enough credit.
I believe
the work that they're doing.
I think it was my uncle Albert Einstein said that we only use about 10% of our brains consciously. The rest is busy doing stuff.
Yes. It's not idle. Yeah.
No, it's not. No, it's never idle. And I think he secretly wished that he could use more than 10% consciously. But whatever that may be, true or not true, doesn't matter. Our brains are busy the whole time, and it does a lot of processing. So I want to make a statement, but it's also a fun fact, as I like to call these things. And that is, and this is the statement, it is almost immaterial how far apart the speakers are from each other beyond the minimum distance that they need to be apart. I'll address that a little bit later. Exactly how far apart they really need to be and why they need to be that far apart. But until that time, let me make the statement again. The distance apart for the speakers beyond the minimum distance that they need to be apart is in actual fact almost immaterial. Not 100% immaterial, but almost.
Almost.
And the reason, to a certain extent, is if they are closer than that distance, they appear to both our ears as direct sounds. Right speaker, the left ear can hear that as a direct source, and the right ear. Same for the left-hand speaker. The left-hand ear can hear that, and the right-hand ear can hear it as a direct. And the moment that happens, and that is dependent on the distance between us and the speaker and how far the speaker is. So the closer we are, the closer the speakers, the closer we get to the front of the speaker, the closer the speaker's separation distance can be. Okay, we'll unpack that shortly. So, and the reason for that is interesting. The speakers doesn't form the soundstage. They just relay the soundstage and imaging information that was captured during the recording. So they don't impart any information that we need to form a soundstage. They produce the sound, but they don't influence what the soundstage is like. There's a caveat to this. Certain speakers on-axis and off-axis response is terribly bad. It doesn't make it a bad speaker. It is just the on-axis versus off-axis response of the speaker is so bad in comparison to each other. There's a lot of off-axis response, which means that depending on where the speaker is, if it's got a high degree of off-axis and it's not as directional, that may cause interference, and the speakers may have to be further apart and further away from you for that type of speaker. So that's one thing to look out for when you look at speakers, is the on-axis versus off-axis if sound staging is important.
Just generally, knee-jerk reaction here. Off-axis is more likely to be accentuated in panel speakers than in cones? Was that just a assumption made?
No, not really. Not really. Remember, the difference between flat panel speakers and cone type dynamic speakers is the fact that the dynamic cone type speaker is considered a point source.
Yeah.
Flat panel speaker is not a point source. That's a broad response across the complete surface area, all frequencies equally everywhere, not the same loudness, but the same distribution across a wide area, which means that they are not a point source. So there is a distinction.
Off-axis thing not necessarily influenced by the type of the speaker design in terms of the actual codes. It could be.
It could be. And that depends. Certain speaker manufacturers focus very much on getting a speaker with high directionality, a high level of on-axis response. So there's a small sweet spot if you toe in the speakers or not, versus other speakers or speaker manufacturers, or even speaker models for the same speaker manufacturer, where they have a broader response on axis, and there may be a lot more off-axis response, which means if you turn the speaker 90 degrees away or 45 degrees away from you, you may not be in the sweet spot, but it is not as bad as a very directional speaker that's got a narrow sweet spot. So there's a lot more side emission of wave energy than just frontal emission of wave energy.
That in essence is a speaker design philosophy.
Yes, it's not right nor wrong. That is just
okay. So how they prefer to make their
exactly. If I'm not mistaken, AR, which are a long-time manufacturer of speakers from the 1960s, they actually did proper measurement, and they issued proper specifications for their speaker systems. And what they did is they designed it not for the directionality. It had a broad off-axis response, but they had different design criteria, and they had different goals and targets to reach, and hence the reason why they are they were designed to build that.
Entirely fair.
Exactly. So now moving speakers further apart, one effect that has got is in actually lengthening the path between the speaker and our ear. Okay, so the further away they are, which means that the relative reflection, if they're close to a side wall, becomes less and less as a percentage of the direct wave. Okay, we want enough difference between the reflected wave and the direct wave so that we don't mess up the timing information, because the left-hand speaker will reflect from the right-hand wall, especially if it is towed in, and that reflection will reach your ear. Now remember, there's only 220, I almost made that mistake again, 220 millimeters between our ears on average. And so it's easy, you can see it's easy for the reflective wave to maybe be in phase and hit the other ear very, very close to the right ear, very close to the timing difference to the left ear. So that may become a problem. So that's why sometimes sound stages get messed up and you don't have the best sound stage. We'll get to the 4 criteria that I believe is important for sound staging and imaging a little bit later. But let me part on this bit for now. The speakers themselves cannot change the sound stage, just like the amp can't, cables can't, and the source can't. The recording can. Yes, it's made at the recording. All these things do is they reproduce whatever the timing and volume information is.
Okay.
So remember, I think in episode 2, William, I spoke about the fact that our senses are integrated. They don't operate in isolation from each other. Here's another little fun fact. Color perception. Color perception for certain people can be influenced by sound, by music, by noise, by speech. It's a medical fact. People can go and look it up if they don't believe this. But here is the thing. Noise affects some people's ability, and all types of noise, to be able to distinguish between red and green. This has got nothing to do with color blindness at all. You can be colorblind or you don't have to be colorblind. But for certain people, noise can affect their ability to distinguish between red and green. Now, you can understand that that is very dangerous, for the fact that red and green we normally use to indicate on and off. We frequently indicate dangerous and safe. Green is safe, dangerous is red. And another fun fact. Yes, another fun fact on top of this is, you know why red is considered as to be the universal color of danger? What happens if you cut yourself?
It's blood, yes.
And it's red.
Yeah.
Hence, red signifies for...
It's fine. It's fine if it's other people's. I'm okay with it. If it's mine, I tend to pass out.
Yeah, we do. Some humans do have that kind of response. But getting back to it, so you can imagine at a traffic light, if you're listening to Doof Doof Wednesday loud music, that if you suffer from this condition, you may not be able to distinguish between the red and the green signal, and that can cause a fatal accident to yourself or to a third party. Entirely possible. So once again, it just shows, and to your point of closing your eyes when you do critical listening, and a lot of people do this, it helps to isolate our listening abilities from our visual abilities, to be able to get our brains to focus more on the listening than on the visual inputs. Fascinating fact that color perception can be influenced by noise and music. So another bit of information that I think that is important and that people do not realize plays a huge part in our ability to locate a sound stage is the rest of our bodies. So our torsos, the front of our chest area, our shoulders, and remember this is a curved area, and it'll reflect, depending on where it hits us, it'll reflect the sound waves up into the top of our outer ear structures, which will get reflected back down and into our inner ear canal. So your body position relative to where you are sitting and listening or whatever can influence what the sound sounds like. Because now this area, your shoulder, will reflect the sound here, and this side of your body won't, because it doesn't receive those direct audio signals. Versus if you face the speaker this way, sorry for the sound, because I turned away, it would have gone soft. But that's a good analogy, actually. So if you face the two speakers directly, both of them will hit here, and some of it will get reflected. This side will get reflected up here into your left ear. This side will reflect into your right ear. And there's a huge amount of blend and mix of things that happen between your torso and your shoulders, reflecting the information there. So that's another thing that people frequently discount or do not consider when we are talking about critical listening. Now, the head, the shoulders, and the torso and your ears are all part of the outer ear transfer function, is what the technical term is for all of this. So even though your ears is up here on your head, your torso, your shoulders, and everything else of your upper body can influence, and in actual fact does influence, what sounds enter your ear. And this is all part of the cues that we then use: phasing, diffraction, reflection, all of those things. Quite interesting, quite
So
staggering if we really think
I'm
about
going to have to be of the same weight
it.
viewing equipment and in the same position and not. This is the best thing I've ever heard because my hands will influence the sound.
There are
There
reflections.
are some systems where it's hard to do that, actually. They're that good.
uh, but yeah,
Wow.
so that gives us an indication of how sophisticated our hearing actually is,
Actually,
which
yes.
a lot of people don't consider as a very sophisticated sense
It's
that it is.
you're right. It's a sensitivity to it that is remarkable. Wow. Okay.
Great. All right. Next point. I have referred to ground reflections from floor, or if you're in the outside, from the ground, in the previous part of this episode and in previous episodes. So the timing information and the reflection information and phasing information and all sorts of things coming from floor or ground reflections is another thing that we don't normally consider. Just as an example, if there is a coffee table, a rather large coffee table with a glass or a marble top or gilded top between us and the speakers, that will mess, obviously, because now you get one reflection from the table, you'll get another reflection from the floor. So now you get two reflections. You get two reflections from the side, or three reflections from each side. You get reflections from the ceiling. And all of these things, our hearing needs, our ears receive that, and our listening abilities will have to interpret all this information. So you want to make it as simple as possible, and a large table or a coffee table between you and the loudspeakers might not be the best for audio. The wife acceptance factor, if you chuck that thing out, may be another matter altogether.
Noticed.
Right. So the our ears, as I've explained, is a binaural system, which mean, or binaural system, to, I guess, use the correct pronunciation of that technical term. But we use that system in just a normal life. Forget about hi-fi for a moment. Forget about stereo recordings. We use reflections in the sound localization, obviously, as I've been explaining, and we use all our ears are good enough to pick up in a 360-degree full sphere around us all of these reflections. And depending on the level of the reflections and the timing of the reflection, our brains will make sense out of it. It can sometimes be disconcerting if you receive echoes at a certain time period after the original sound, and that can mess up. Well, that certainly messes up my ability to in distinguish speech properly or listen to notes properly, because they blend into each other. And I think that's sometimes where the term muddy sounding reproduction comes from, because of all the various reflections, which is actually not your sound system or the recording for the most part. Modern day, that wouldn't really happen. It is the room and the state of the room which will cause this to really happen. So that the 35 milliseconds that I've explained in the previous part is really our ears integrate the sound over time, and anything that reaches our ears within the 35 milliseconds obviously is integrated as the same sound, and it just adds to the loudness perception. Now, our brains are intelligent enough as well to distinguish between the room sound and whatever it is that we are listening to. And it can pick up on the room sound, and it can subtract the room sound away the cocktail party thing we discussed in the hearing episode. So our brains are amazing at isolating room sound and all of those things. But those reflections, as I've explained, is very, very important. The reflection of the coffee table and of the floor and of the ceiling. So room treatment to reduce the reflections to a level that's low enough in comparison to the direct sound that reach our ears, that it's not going to mess with that timing information. That's the reason why room treatment is important. I think the biggest problem with acousticians and people in general speaking about this is they do not really articulate why it is important to treat a room. Everybody accepts that a room needs to be treated, but I think for a lot of audiophiles and enthusiasts, it doesn't really add up that it is that important to treat a room. The gear is sexy. A treated room is a chore. You have to convince the family that this is a good thing to spend money on, the way that it looks, getting people in to measure it. If you do not have the willingness, the ability, or the inclination to do it yourself, all of those things add up. And that's why I think most people's rooms are not treated. It's because the reason for room treatment is not conveyed in such a way that people easily understand why they need the room treatment. They believe you need room treatment to have a better listening, but this sounds fine.
Yeah.
And correctly, it does sound fine, but you can improve it one heck of a lot. So the delay, our interaural distance, that ITD that I spoke about, the timing difference between our ears, and all the reflective sounds and all the direct signals that reach our ears can give rise if there is an issue with too much reflection and speaker positioning. That will, together with a band pass filtering that our ears do, that can cause the soundstage for you not to be able to really detect that it's a soundstage and place the individual instruments on the soundstage. So between 35 and 50 milliseconds is a gray area from a timing perspective, in the sense that even if sounds arrive sometimes closer to 35 and sometimes closer to 50 milliseconds, our ears can deal with that gray timing issues between those in different ways that hasn't been quantified really. Beyond 50 milliseconds, we know for most individuals that will become an echo, and less than 50 milliseconds is room tone or reverberation on the inside of the room. If you do the usual, you can hear the bounce, even though the online thing will mess up the sound ability, you can still hear the reflections and everything inside the room. So just a side note on this, and I did address that in a previous episode, but I think it is important. If your speakers are not on speaker stands and isolated from things like solid furniture or anything else that extends towards the listener by, I would say, more than 300 millimeters, 30 centimeters, ruler length, 12 inches, 1 foot, whatever you want to call it. If you're this side of the pond, the other side of the pond, it is important to then isolate the speakers by some vibration isolation foam or rubber or whatever. Even stick it on a cardboard box and put normal foam, the thin stuff inside the box, just to prevent it from collapsing on itself with the weight of the speaker. And that's why speaker spikes on carpets and feet on hard floors are normally important, is to help doing that isolation and do the decoupling, because sound travels a number of times faster through solid objects than air. You will get the wrong localization information because your ear picks up the first arrival as the source for the localization, and all the other things are different types of information. You don't place it on secondary information that you receive.
I had some discussion, engagement, debate, argument,
Robust debate.
robust debate with a manufacturer of high-end audio furniture. So the argument was made that I said, well, the angle of your spikes don't in it. So in other words, there was a point made that one of the components that I happened to be lugging around was 90-kilogram stand, 4 shelves and the whole spiel. At the bottom of that 90-kilogram stand were 4 very sharp spikes. And when I put said stand down on my tiles, you can guess what happened.
Yes, I can imagine.
My stand sunk by about 1 centimeter, and I had 4 neat little holes in my tiles.
Yes. The point loading is too high.
I'm prepared to sacrifice some tiles in the pursuit of my audio perfection and my audio environment. However, the argument has been made that your particular spikes are at a ridiculous 80-degree angle, so they're extremely thin and extremely sharp. And if we're going to be decoupling our systems to that level, is the angle of the spike important? And he said to me, we're not decoupling anything. We're coupling the system to the ground. So it's a coupling device to ensure that the sound waves, as we say from the speakers, are the first things to get to us, not the other way around.
Okay, so
now you've used decoupling. So there's a little bit of a, so whether it's interpretation of the definition, I suppose.
Well, coupling and decoupling are the exact opposites of each other in any language and any definition that we choose to speak about here. However, what I believe he was referring to was coupling the speaker or the stand, the furniture, and the cabinet of the speaker to the floor to almost form a solid mass with the floor, so that doesn't move depending on the excursion of the speaker cones inside the speaker. So in that sense, with the weights that you've mentioned, that could very well be mechanical coupling to the floor to reduce the possibility of resonances of the speaker cabinet. What
we had another discussion in terms of how to improve it. And how to improve it was go and buy yourself some concrete blocks and put them on the bottom shelf and make it even heavier.
that certainly is a heavy speaker cabinet. I do believe does have, and let me say, emphasize the word believe. That is the accepted way of constructing high-end loudspeaker cabinets. Is the heavier the better. The thicker the walls, the less resonance there are, and the less sounds are emanated from those cabinets. And coupling them to the floor in that sense does make a little bit of sense. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It might be a good thing. I don't know. But what I am referring to is if you take the speaker cabinet and you put it on with no decoupling, with no vibration barrier between the speaker cabinet and the table or whatever you put it on, and excluded obviously speaker stands. If you put it on that, the coupling of the acoustical energy from the cabinet itself goes into whatever the solid object is you put it into, and if that extends more than, and it's most likely less than 30 centimeters, 300 millimeters, but let's not get hung up on how much it needs to protrude in front of the speaker. That's measurable. But the moment that happens and you don't decouple it from that solid piece of metal or furniture and it extends towards you, that will be the point source that gives you the energy, and because it is closer, the level of that energy can be lower than what the speaker directly radiates, and it'll still override what comes from your speaker cone. So that's the difference between the coupling that he was referring to and the decoupling that I'm referring to.
Got it.
Hopefully that makes sense.
Clarification. It makes absolute sense.
100% then. All right, so I can summarize all of this by saying volume and timing differences are the cues that we need to place sounds mostly on the horizontal plane for the soundstage, a little bit on the vertical plane of the soundstage. That is all timing information. The distance that we perceive the instruments or the vocalist to be from in other words, the distance separation between the instrument and the vocalist, or between one instrument and another instrument, that is purely dependent on volume. And as I've explained, it's not necessarily just the raw volume of the instrument itself. It is also how the mastering engineer would be treating that, because he's got control with his fader to be able to increase or decrease the volume, and thereby placing things further or closer to us. And that is also done to a certain extent to be able to help in building the soundstage, the volume control, because that opens a space. Let's take a vocalist as an example, a singer, that will help and assist in opening the space for the singer's voice in this wall of sound from all the instruments and everything that is playing. And that is important to help us, and when we do critical listening, to place the vocalist at the distance and between the instruments, wherever the mastering engineer decided they need to be.
And I have to say, having attended a number of live concerts, it's important at a live concert too. Because into a good live concert where the recording engineer or the sound engineer at that concert is able to place Bruce Springsteen front and center, and you can hear Bruce Springsteen front and center, it transforms the listening experience entirely. And when you hear the lead vocalist sort of somewhere behind the drums and behind the bass guitar at the back of the soundstage, literally the stage,
yes,
you could say that was a crappy performance and I didn't enjoy it. And it's remarkable. And I think it's probably for that reason that I don't mind spending the money for those golden circle tickets so you can be in the middle.
Yes.
It's just,
it does make a difference.
It makes a difference.
The cheap seats are cheap seats for a reason. Absolutely. So, having discussed the soundstage a little bit, for the people that had the privilege, and I've never been in a proper anechoic chamber, or anechoic chamber, let me pronounce that correctly. I've never had the privilege being in one, but I've spoken to people that I mean, at the CSIR, they have or used to have an anechoic chamber, as far as I know. And I've spoken to people that's been in there. It is a very weird experience, and placing sounds and finding positions for sounds is very, very difficult in an anechoic chamber. And the reason for that is you walk on a mesh. When you walk into this thing, you walk on a mesh, and the same, and I'll pop up the picture, the same fiberglass and foam, those triangle things that are in the walls and all sorts of orientations, the ceiling, all four walls, and on the floor. So they're underneath where you walk, and there's a mesh, metal mesh across it, which is mostly transparent to any audio energy and or sound energy rather. And that is why in an anechoic chamber there is no reflections from the floor. So localization, because of that information that is missing, becomes supremely difficult. You'll see in the picture I found one where you can see the mesh and everything very, very nicely.
Looks like something out of a 1920s horror film.
Something to that effect, yes. Something to that effect. That's a good way, I guess, to describe what it looks like. So one of the things that we do unconsciously, and we did, and I did mention it in the past in one of the episodes, is we augment the placement by moving our heads imperceptibly. So you don't even if people look at you, it is almost not possible to see that you do these micro movements. And that is our brains instructing our heads to move our ears to be able to pick up all these subtle cues to be able to do this sound positioning and extracting as much timing information as possible so that we can do this as accurately as possible.
It was one of the things I watched in my early days. I was watching, I think it was Dion actually, listening to something. And you're exactly right. If you're actually watching someone doing critical listening, you can see it. Your head does move. You do sort of, and I find myself, I know when a certain piece of music is coming up that I know and I want to reference it, I do this.
Yes.
I go forward a little bit. And it's kind of like, because I'm waiting for it, I'm anticipating it, and then it's kind of like, now I can reference it. And it's just now I understand why.
And that's only the partial explanation of it. The other one is, at higher frequencies, there's a lot more peaks and troughs and comb filtering interference and diffraction interference and phasing interference. And by imperceptibly moving your head forwards by fractions of a millimeter or a millimeter, or even sideways, or just twisting your head on your body, you change what your ears pick up from that perspective, be it phasing, be it comb filtering, be it a null or a valley or a peak of the interfered sound where they interfere in phase or out of phase, or partially in or partially out of phase. And your brain uses all of those things, and your brain tells your body, move, I need more information. So that's what we naturally do, and nobody even realizes that this is happening. So the last bit on this is all the reflections and from floor, ceiling, walls, and all of that, first reflections from the back wall, all of those things we use, and there is timing information embedded in there, and we use that to do and to build the sound stage and where we perceive the thing to be that's making this noise in front of us or besides us, or whatever the case may be. And people will sometimes mic up a performance in such a way that some of the room sound is recorded, because that room sound contains a lot of this timing information and the reflections and the nulls and all of these things. And that is conveyed as part of the stereo image. And the mastering engineer utilizes all of this information, including the room sound. If it's a live performance, they will record the room sound as well as the individual sound, and they will blend and mix that as part of the mastering process to be able to give us the maximum enjoyment. So now to jump to mono playback very briefly. If we consider, if we take a HiFi and we just switch off one channel, a stereo system, and we listen to one speaker, we can place that, even with our eyes closed, we'll be able to place that speaker 100% accurately where the speaker is. But now, because it is in mono, all the sound that comes from that speaker has got zero soundstage, and we place all the sound at the same position as the speaker. There can't be any vertical or any horizontal soundstage. There may be enough information in the volume differences that we might be able to perceive louder instruments or whatever is played back as closer to us, that will still persist. And you can do a simple test by doing exactly that. Take the balance control, whack it all the way to one side, unplug one of the channels from your source side into your preamp, and just listen to that with your eyes closed, and you'll experience exactly that. So jumping back from mono into stereo. So stereo systems. Where does stereo come from, and why was stereo actually even invented? Very simple. To be able to give us a more realistic, more enjoyable, better quality reproduction of what was originally recorded. That's the reason for stereo systems. The engineers that invented it was very, very clever because they realized that these psychoacoustic things that we've been discussing, volume and timing information, is everything that we need. And because we've got binaural listening and our ears function in this way, they are able to fool us in reproducing from a stereo system all the cues and the timing and volume information we need to be able to virtually recreate what was recorded live or what was recorded in a recording studio, everything dry or whatever it is that was recorded.
So, if that's true, we never need more than 2 speakers.
For stereo sound, but now you are correct. For stereo reproduction, we don't need more than 2 speakers because with 2 speakers, it'll create a phantom center speaker, but it can't create anything else. The real world is actually, if I can use this term loosely, is coming at us in super stereo, which means full surround sound. Hence the reason multiple places where the sound originates from all at the same time. And the only way we can fully recreate that is with multi-channel systems. So generally referred to as surround sound. There are various types and various systems, but
The world of DSP.
yes, and then immediately we get into DSP as well, which is maybe a good subject for a future episode.
A different day.
Really
Absolutely. I just wanted to leap ahead there just because because I can. But yeah, no, it was point made about stereo. Those guys were very, very clever. And point made about surround sound is that it would be very hard to have surround sound today without DSP. So the digital age is what's enabled surround sound to be a reality. You could not do this surround sound with your gramophones of the 1920s.
Well, not with the 1920s. In the late 60s, early 70s, there were the quadraphonic systems. You may fondly recall those. I had the privilege to actually listening to one of them.
Oh, really?
Yes, if I recall correctly, it was a Sansui system. I was still at school at that point in life. We traveled to Pretoria back then to some family, and they were fairly well heeled. So they had, if I recall correctly, it was Sansui quadraphonic system or something like that. It's a bit hazy today. But we had those, and they had special records which could reproduce the 4-channel sound, but nothing in comparison to today's multi-channel surround sound systems. For obvious reasons, it was not very sophisticated.
Different discussion for a different day.
Absolutely. And if people want to hear more about that, I can certainly do a little bit of research. I know a little bit about it, so we can certainly unpack that. Maybe it might be a good way before we step into DSP to start off with that, then go to DSP and then to full surround sound. That might make for a pretty neat episode, I think. But anyhow, so we now understand why stereo systems were actually invented, and the most underrated people and the people that should get the most for developing the system are actually not the engineers, but the artists. And that's the recording engineers, which are artists, and the mastering engineers, which are artists, which have been pushing the boundaries ever since stereo hit the scene, really into multi-channel and in massively expanding the tools and the methodologies to be able to give us very, very nice stereo sound stages and images. I know I referred to some of the silly tools, but that is tongue in cheek. The tools are not really silly. That is part of what the artists use, and it's not meant as a derogatory term. That is merely people will consider mastering engineers and artists being silly for using tools like that, but what they don't appreciate is the effect that it's got in broadening our pleasure and our enjoyment in consuming what those artists have given us. And they are
Couldn't agree.
artists.
Agreed.
So if the recording is done as they were originally done, some of the first recordings in the time of the Beatles, it was well understood that we needed some information in the left channel only, some information in the right channel only, or mostly in the left channel and mostly in the right channel, or balance between left and right so that it can give us that phantom center image. And be able to allow us a soundstage, but it's not a very sophisticated soundstage, so it almost appears as if it's artificial. If you listen to some of those early recordings, nothing wrong with it. It was the best that they had at the time. Everything is analog. There are no digital processing. There were none of the doors and the tools that everybody enjoy and use almost for free, like the DaVinci editor that I use, which has got absolutely mind-bogglingly amazing tool sets, both for video and for audio, obviously. And the audio side in DaVinci Resolve is phenomenal. But enough of that. So originally it was very simplistic and very unsophisticated how the recording was done and the mastering was done. Today it's a different matter altogether. And as I've said, it's evolved tremendously and it's much, much more sophisticated and much more difficult to figure out what was done to give us this amazing soundstage. The tools, there are things that they use in the mix, like they will use, and there's hordes of different stereo miking patterns, so they can have the microphone as if my fingertips are the front ends of the microphone. Just give me a second, let me grab one here. Just grab a typical microphone. Somewhere.
Like I said, he's got all the toys.
So this is one that I'm not currently using. It's a Sennheiser shotgun microphone. You can see the little slots on the side, and this makes it very directional. So if you use two of these microphones, sometimes they will put them like this, and that will give you the phasing, correct phasing information. Sometimes they will put them like that, so that you get a different type of phasing, but it's also a valid stereo pair. Sometimes they will place them like this. There are probably a dozen patterns that people can use to position microphones. The other thing that they can do, if there's a drum set, they can actually mic individual drums inside, and cymbals and hi-hats and bass and all of those things with individual microphones, which will frequently be completely different. Or they might have one overhead microphone and they record the whole drum kit plus some room sound, and then individual mics, and they can start blending the things. And that they all get separate channels. So no wonder that they run 48 and up to 96 channels worth of audio in a DAW to be able to do all of these things. And I see we are
phenomenal.
It is absolutely just phenomenal. I'm going to go until this one kicks us out, and then we'll pick it up again. I'll just do an edit.
I may have to beg for 20 minutes just to go and fetch child from school.
That's fine. not a problem at all. I'll have to do something similar shortly as well. But we've made good progress. We're almost there. So mastering engineers will refer to sound that they've recorded as either dry or sweetened. A dry recording means there is no room sound, there is no reflections, there's no reverberation, or at least very, very little reverberation in that dry sound. And then they will talk about or refer to sweetening of the sound. And the sweetening means that they've introduced reverberation, or they introduced equalization to make it sound better, or a stereo widening plug-in, or a channel strip with on drums, something that they frequently use as a gate to enhance the punchiness of the drum sound, if that's the sound that they want. And take note, They're the artist. They are looking for a certain sound. What their intention is, together with the artist, is what we get to enjoy. And we don't know what that was. Except if we've spoken to the recording or the mastering engineer, we don't know what their intent was. Except
It's one of my
listening.
it's one of those things on my bucket list. I want to go now and watch this actually happen. You know,
I can
yeah,
understand that. I can understand.
really want to do it.
Uh,
Yeah.
vocals and instruments are treated similarly, not equally, but similarly, to be able to produce the sound that the mastering engineer would actually want. So the approach for the production normally, um, the microphone would represent the listener in a certain or to a certain extent. It doesn't literally mean that you are supposed to be positioned there uh, because of the engineering issues around microphones and musical instruments and vocals. The microphones are normally a lot closer to the instruments and the vocals than what we will be when we enjoy a live concert. Uh, but nonetheless, the microphone kind of represents our ears in this whole bigger scheme of capturing what the recording engineer would want. And then the mastering engineer would interpret all of those things to be able to do his mastering and give us what they believe is the best possible listening experience for this particular type of music. Um, Microphones are normally not placed behind performers or musicians, behind instruments. They're always in front, and front refers to where the listener would normally be in a live situation. So that's the relationship, and that's almost universally so. There's very few exceptions where they will change that setup, really. So the mix that the mastering engineer creates is normally he is sitting behind his desk and console. The speakers are in front of him, on the wall, on the floor. There may be, if it's surround sound mix that he's busy with, they will obviously be behind him, but he will be the representation of us as the consumers of this recording. And hence it is important to realize what recording studio setups look like to be able to kind of at least the relationship between the loudspeakers themselves and the listener to try and reproduce that. It doesn't have to be exactly the same as what the recording engineer had or the mastering engineer had, but at least it needs to resemble the triangle and the placement of, let's use Atmos as an example. They've got very specific placement and positions of loudspeakers reference to height and physical positions around you. And there's a reason for that because that's what the recording or the mastering engineer actually used.
Yeah.
Right. So stereo is about the front 90 degrees in front of us. And to a lesser extent about the front 180 degrees. Stereo imaging doesn't do anything for anything behind us. That's where surround sound and multi-channel systems gets into the equation to be able to reproduce the things that are behind us. Your reference to what was that Top Gun flick?
Maverick.
Yeah, Maverick and Top Gun. If the aircraft flies overhead in a stereo system, you can somewhat discern that that's busy happening because of the Doppler effect that was recorded and all of those things. In a multi-sound system, there is actually acoustical energy that is generated behind you, which gives you a much better representation. Hence my reference to super stereo, basically. As I've alluded to, stereo system was created as a reproduction system to recreate the timing information and the volume information, and those are the only two things that they record. So by its very definition, those are the only two things that can be utilized in reproduction to reproduce a soundstage. There is nothing else. It's not possible because that's the only information that can be recorded. The relative timing information and volume information. So across all the multiple microphones, one of the things that is very, very important to mastering engineers is the relative timing of all the audio segments. They always need to make sure that that timing is correct, and the timing differences there is minute, and we can pick it up as a off-tune instrument if the timing information somehow gets messed up inside the mastering process. So that's very, very important. There's an interesting mastering process that is used for stereo recording, just a side note again, and I keep on doing this to myself and to my to our poor audience and getting sidetracked and things popping in
Fear,
when they shouldn't.
fear and value.
It feels a little bit like a chameleon on a M&M's packet or a Smartie box. You don't know which color you need to turn.
There you go.
Yeah, so I'm multicolored, I guess. But anyhow, so it is one where they have a microphone in which is a cardioid pattern, which means it's just sensitive in this area, pointing at the recording source. And then they have an omnidirectional microphone, which might be this side or two other microphones to the side of this one. And that gives you an omnidirectional pattern. And that is then the center and the two sides that is recorded as a stereo image. And it's got huge benefits. So that's a modern one that was invented. And a lot of people now use that center and side recording technique for recording stereo signals, and we can unpack this if there are people that's interested in it. I just thought it is certainly relevant to the processing, to giving us the much improved stereo reproduction. So reproduction side of things. So now in doing the playing back of whatever it was that was mastered and recorded. Psychoacoustics is obviously at the heart of this. And psychoacoustics in the sense is the inclusive science embracing all the physical, the torso, the pinna, the outer ear canal, and the sound pathways and their functions in our perception of sound. The interrelationships between all of those things, as I've explained, is obviously very important. And in many ways, psychoacoustics is the human basis, really, for the entire field of audio engineering. Because of psychoacoustics and how we had to discover all of these things right from the beginning to be able to give us any other technology. Our understanding is not 100% complete. There are still new things being discovered all the time. So once again, none of this is cast in stone, but this is very, very accurate with the information available as it stands today. We briefly mentioned the bandwidth of the sound, and there is an effect of that bandwidth, that graph with a pass band and all the frequencies that are rejected, and it's a moving window, and there are multiple ones because we get all frequencies at the same time. Now, what that or rather as part of that passband filter, there is loudness effects of that all of that creates inside of our ear, not as part of the source that we are receiving, but this is generated by our bodies and our ears and the outer ear canal. I want to say the inner ear, but it's the outer ear canal. And all of those things are vitally important, as we've already discussed, in being able to understand and process all these cues that we are receiving. So one effect of this is 160 hertz, and that is related to the size of our ears, the outer parts. That is also the base bandwidth of this pass band filter that are created by our bodies. And the reason why that is important is that has got a lot to do with the volume information. So below 160 hertz, the ear dimensions is of such a nature that the loudness remains the same even though the bandwidth is increased. So the loudness, how we perceive loudness doesn't change. Okay. Above 160 hertz, that loudness information is important and we can pick that up. If the bandwidth change, the loudness no longer changes. So that's another thing that our brains use to be able to interpret all of this information. So we can understand that as the frequency increases, um, the volume level is going to stay the same for the same bandwidth. But below 160 hertz, the volume information for the same bandwidth will start changing. So that's another cue that our ears are using. And this effect, we did discuss, I think, in the first episode, MP3s and the encoding that was used, the lossy encoding and the reason for that. And this is part of the effect. This 160 hertz is a key one, and this bandwidth pause band that our ears make up is vital, and that rejects a lot of sound. Although the sound reaches our ear, this pause band will reject a lot of that information. And that is actually what is used by the encoding to be able to reject these sounds. Is that encoding rejecting perfectly exactly the same sounds as what our ears are rejecting? No, it can't ever do that.
I was going to say,
Yeah,
there's another episode.
sufficient to say that no, the MP3 or any encoder for that matter can't do that. So to have a more faithful reproduction, there is something to be said for the audiophiles that say, bugger this encoding, I want lossless file digital systems, because I'd rather have my ears, and I think sometimes they do forget that the ears do this, but I'll rather have my ears reject the things because that doesn't cost me anything, although the much bigger files require much bigger hard drives, and everybody loves the audio files for buying these expensive things because they make a living out of it.
We'll get to that,
But yes.
because that is a listening test I'm prepared to take.
I think many people have done that, and there is fairly accepted criteria, and people in general understand and accept the fact that the encoders can't do exactly the same job as our ears, so it is perceptible. People can hear lossy.
And those encoders, you're right, and those encoders are their own specific method of doing it.
Various
and
encoders, various
do
encoders will give you various rejections of volume information.
I will specify the situation or circumstances under which I'm prepared to do it. They're very specific. They need to be, because the pixels are very small. But it's one of the things I've often wanted to do is take a whole bunch of people, put them in a room, and say, A, B, A, B.
Yes.
Let me know, and the results, I think, would be interesting. Yeah. Let me not digress.
So no problem at all. So getting on with the masking effects. The masking for different individuals will differ because there's a lot of difference between the various, how shall I say, the various things that gets rejected because of the difference of our heads, our bodies, our torsos, our ears, the outer ear structures, and all of those things. So obviously there would be a difference. But as we say, it is perceptible between lossy and lossless. Some people maintain that they can hear between the various lossless formats. I'm no expert on that, and I'm not going to stick my neck out on that one at this point in time. But sufficient to say there is something, or not something, this has got a name, and it's called the Haas or the precedence effect. So there's basically two things. One is for volume, one is for frequency.
Yep.
And that will create its own artifacts that our brains are sensitive to as well. And hence why it is possible to distinguish between different encoders if we can distinguish, or some individuals can distinguish between various lossless encoders, just as an encoder. I'm not talking about the whole transmission system and the analog to digital and then digital to analog. I'm just talking about the encoder itself and the decoder for that system. I'm not sure. There are too many other variables that is very difficult to eliminate. So I won't swing either way on that one. I'll leave it for other people to discuss and have fire suits on forums, etc., due to the discussions that is ongoing. Right, so another law is that our ears integrate sound, as I've previously said. The sounds that reaches our ear are added as loudness. I've explained why that happens, but it is just as important as the reflections themselves. And as I've explained and showed the distance of the 8.5 microseconds that we can distinguish, not milliseconds, microseconds, that our ears can distinguish, that's about 6.5 millimeters worth of distance that the sound will travel in that, under normal standard conditions, that the sound will travel. So 6 millimeters is probably about that yay much. Maybe a bit better to see there, but anyhow, and all of this is really, really vitally important in helping our brains to decode that information. So once again, all the sound that our ears integrate is 35 milliseconds to 40 milliseconds, depending on the individual. And that distance that the sound will travel during the 35 to 40 milliseconds is 12 to 13 meters. So if you consider, if you're that far away, the reflected sound from a wall, the first reflection that reaches your ear, has got a longer time because it travels a longer distance, and that will now no longer be integrated as part of the original sound, but that is now room sound, because we understand that's a reflection and it can be a reverberation or an echo depending on the size of the room. Once again, it brings us back to room treatment and how we deal with the reflections. Sorry for bumping the microphone stand. The reflections and everything else to be able to prevent the soundstage from being messed up by all of these reflections and things.
Got it.
Right. So our brains actually hear the room separate from the direct sounds that reaches our ears, because there are multiple reflections and reverberations and around the room, and our brains are sophisticated enough to pick that up as a separate entity as what the room does with the music that reaches our ears directly. So there are definitely those two distinct things, and it's not just one reflection, there are thousands of them in all
So
three dimensions.
this is what's affecting our soundstage.
Yes, yes,
So
that can most definitely bedevil our soundstage. But once again, speaker placement and room, like I said, important.
and of course your source has to have that information.
Yeah, it has to. Otherwise, if you listen to a mono source on a stereo system, it's pointless. You won't get a soundstage. You'll just get something in between the speakers that you can listen to, but there is no discernible imaging in that soundstage. It's just a virtual center image that you are perceiving. So the funny thing is our ears don't discard anything. It channels everything that reaches them into our inner ear canals, but our brains is doing the discarding of information. Yes. So it's not in the hearing that we discard information, we discard it in the listening process. It still reaches our brain, but our brain says, nah, not this bit. Sorry, go away. Don't want to hear to, don't want to listen to that. I'm hearing that, but I don't want to listen to it.
So now we got to talk about the equipment that makes all this stuff happen.
Yes, yes, that's the next thing. Just
am I jumping ahead a little bit here? I am reading your notes.
Absolutely.
Full disclosure.
No, that's the intention. Otherwise, this is going to be decidedly a monologue, and it's going to become pointless.
Yeah, getting to the good bits. Yeah.
Yes. So headphones and a soundstage and imaging. Not going to discuss that today because that's a full episode on itself. But yes, you can get um, a soundstage from headphones, and you can get imaging from headphones. But that is something we'll discuss at some point. There are certain challenges because you don't get the mixing and all the diffraction and phasing information and things like that, goes away. You do get the volume differences and you get the pure timing differences that was recorded, and that's the reason why headphones still do work. This, funny enough, is, and I'm not sponsored by anybody or anything. This is actually part of my video system and not part of my audio system. But these little things are very, very cheap, but they are absolutely astounding. Some hi-fi guys overseas have reviewed these. I think on HiFi you can find review for these Tascams. They also marketed as TX, and they are absolutely brilliant. Wonderful, wonderful little closed ear things, perfect for not causing bleed from my headphones into the microphone and screeching like a piggy around here. Getting onto, as you said, now the actual gear and everything that we use to do the reproduction. So because of all the psychoacoustic issues, and by issues I don't mean bad things, just how psychoacoustics and the human hearing works, um, loudness changes at 1 kilohertz as an example, and I'm just looking at my notes to not miss the technical minute details here. At 1 kilohertz for a very low level, so a very soft sound, we need to change at 1 kilohertz the level by 3 dB, in other words, a doubling of volume, to be able to detect that 1 kilohertz tone being louder, just louder. However, at high levels, so at medium and high volume, we only need a quarter of a dB to be able to distinguish that there was a volume change. So that is how non-linear our hearing is. It's tremendous.
It's taken a few parties to learn that.
Yes. There I can wholeheartedly agree. It takes a few.
Was it the amp that blew or was it the speakers?
It's normally the speakers that gives up the ghost under those.
There's possibly a debate there that we could have another episode.
We can have a robust debate about that one.
Talking about amps going into pure DC and melting speakers, but
yeah, that's amp clipping, but it's still the speaker that's gone south. Be that as it may, at very low levels, as an example, in comparison to 1 kilohertz of 35 hertz, so a very, very low bass frequency, or actually a sub bass frequency, you need a 9 dB level change, not 3 dBs, but now a 9 dB level change, which is 3 times more loud before you detect a change in the volume. So further, apart from it being a volume dependency in how well we can distinguish changes in volume, it is also frequency dependent. So that is a complex bit of things that our brain needs to sort out. So all the sounds obviously reach your ear canal at the same time. And at the same time, with all the reflected sounds, the reflected sound is delayed for obvious reasons because it had to travel further, but it still reaches your ear at virtually the same time. And our ears are still able to distinguish between the direct and the reflected sound, because it uses the direct sound in the precedence effect or the Haas effect, plus all the other psychoacoustic effects, to be able to understand where the point source originated from on the soundstage. And it uses all the other reflections and psychoacoustic artifacts to be able to make sense of this massive sound that reaches our ears, and be able to do funky things like the party trick effect, where you can focus on one thing in a very loud room. And also remembering that it's not only the room that reflects sounds, our body reflects sounds into our ears, and all the folds and the things in our ears actually reflect sounds back to get them into the outer ear canal to be able to reach the eardrum so that we can listen to that. So there's volume information, there's timing information, and then all these psychoacoustic artifacts that our ears require to be able to make sense of what we hear, and so to allow us to actually listen to it. And all of these alterations and combinations of sounds and reflections and things is what actually empowers our brains to understand the world in the way that we do with our sense of hearing and listening. Right. So the soundstage itself. Now we are talking about that we are perceiving. If we combine all the things that we've discussed in the previous episode and all the other episodes, plus what has gone previously in this episode, there are really four things that we need to consider when it gets to sound staging and imaging. Gear is not one of them. Not gear. Let me give you them. The room and the fact that it was treated or not, to be able to mitigate all the reflections and the room sound so that our ears have got half a decent chance to understand the stereo image that reaches us from our loudspeakers to be able to form that soundstage. So a room and a well-treated room is important. If you drag your hi-fi outside into the garden, far away from walls and buildings and things like that, you still make use of exactly the same stuff, except it's the ground that does the reflection. There are no side reflections, and there are very little reflections from overhead, but your torso, your shoulders, your body, your head, all of those things still play a role in being able to understand the sound stage. And one day I'm going to pick up all this stuff and I'm going to personally drag them into and do a little experiment, and I'll film it so that and I'll give running commentary, obviously. I'll do something like that when I got some spare time on my hands. So that's the first thing, is the room and the treatment. The second one is the source that contain the proper recording. So if it doesn't contain sound stage and imaging, forget about it. It has to be there. The third thing is the proper placement of the stereo loudspeakers. They can't be placed so close to each other at whatever distance that they appear as a single point source. There has to be separation so that whatever from the left speaker will reach our left ear direct, but not our right ear direct, and vice versa for the other side. So proper placement of the loudspeaker. And then the fourth thing and the last thing is, we as people need to have the psychoacoustic ability to interpret soundstage. Remember the medical condition I referred to, where we can't distinguish sound stages. Certain people are affected by that. If you don't have that ability, obviously none of this matters to you. So those four things. I did not mention, apart from loudspeakers, but only the placement of loudspeakers, not the type, not if it's a full range or a three-way or a multi-way, or if it's surround sound or anything, none of that. We're talking stereo, but that's besides the point. So we don't need any other things apart from the four things that we've mentioned, and I'll flash them up on the screen, to be able to discern a soundstage. If those things are in place, the soundstage was fixed at the time of mastering and recording, obviously, and these are the only things, because the timing and the volume information is all embedded in the recorded material. So, unfortunately, now this is the controversial part, what I've just stated, because this will be controversial, especially for gear manufacturers, cable manufacturers, because part of their marketing is, if you buy mine, you'll get a better soundstage. You will get a soundstage in the first place. If you buy my speakers, or if you buy my amplifier, or if you buy the cable.
I'll attempt to soften the blow, in that an amplifier speaker cable, whatever, can never add, can never create something that's not there.
Yes.
So if it's not there to begin with, it's not going to make it any better.
Magically make it better, or yeah.
Best it can do is not take away from what's already there.
Faithfully reproduce, in other words.
Maybe the argument is that if you buy my speaker cable, amplifier, whatever it is, I will reduce the amount that other things are taking away. Mine won't take away as much.
That's about the only thing that I can think of, and there I agree with you. Yes, that is certainly plausible. And let me elaborate now on what I've just stated. If all the above things are in place, you've got a pretty decent and a pretty damn good chance that you will get a soundstage. If those four things are done correctly, then no matter what the gear is that you are using, if they're in place, you should be able, with correct speaker placement, you should be able to, even in a badly or a not treated room, and my stupid editing system here, and I'll put up a picture of what it looks like, even this can reproduce a very decent soundstage. I'll admit it's probably about 4.5 meters from the front wall, the wall I'm facing. The speakers are about 4.5 meters away from that. So, but apart from that, the room is not treated for anything.
Yeah.
It's a very bad room. There's a very specific reason why this room is not treated. But we can go into that at a different time. So, all the gear has got very little bearing on the soundstage apart from speaker placement. That's the only piece of gear that's really got an influence on stereo imaging and soundstage. Further, understanding why we can hear this virtual soundstage in the first place is all that we need to be able to understand the laws of physics and their influence, and I'll elaborate right after this, on the soundstage or not on the soundstage, and why I'm making this very controversial statement. So, the virtual soundstage is based on timing and volume information only, nothing else. Now we get to the crux of the matter. So why can't the gear change the soundstage? And I'm not talking about loudspeaker placement. I'm talking about cables, amplifiers, sources, preamplifiers, and things like that. Interconnects between a source and a preamplifier, preamp and an amplifier, amplifier and loudspeakers. They can't change the soundstage as a definitive statement. Right, here is the reason. Take a 4-piece band. There's a bass guitar, an acoustical guitar, a drum set, and a vocalist. They are perfectly in tune and perfectly in sync when they deliver their performance. The timing information at the time of recording is embedded in the recording. If the bass guitar player is out of sync, you will hear it on the recording. There is no amplifier or any piece of equipment that can go and change that after it has been mastered on the recording in that fashion. The mastering engineer can change it by delaying that channel to get into play in sync. But once it's recorded out of sync, nothing can change it. Exactly the same for relative volume information between those four things, or the relative timing. So if the guitar player's timing is out, nothing in this chain can change that. That's a very simplistic way of saying that the timing information that creates the horizontal soundstage cannot be modified after the fact by any equipment because it is just too complex. The equipment will reproduce whatever that is. Great. So, sound staging is an artifact of the loudness and the timing cues, and it's cleverly recorded and mastered by the artists, musicians, and the recording and mastering engineers, and then it is sold to us in digital format or in analog format or whatever the case may be. But that is embedded at that time, and nothing that we do can change the relative information. We can delay one channel versus another one, but that doesn't change the relative timing, and the speaker has to be a long distance different from one to the other to be able to do that. Right. So I think we can agree that sound staging is an artifact of the loudness and the timing cues. Okay. Purely those two things, nothing else. And that, at the end of the day, you want to say something before I conclude?
I think because I have a suspicion of I know where this is going. This is actually, and the fact that we rabbited on for hours. This is something that needs to be digested because it's purely a technical construct. We haven't said a word about the quality of the sound.
Nope.
We're talking about purely the technical side of things. And so before people start to spam our channel that we don't know what we're talking about, understand what we're saying, guys. We're not commenting about quality. We're not commenting about sound reproduction. We're commenting about what is required to make a soundstage only.
The technical fundamentals.
Exactly. And remember, that soundstage is one little part of the entire picture that is audio.
Are there differences in quality for reproduction equipment? Absolutely. Some people make better amplifiers than other people. There are huge differences, technical differences, even between transistorized power stages and valve or tube-based power stages. There are 100%. Absolutely differences, and that's not what we are talking about.
Correct.
Not
that's
at all. It's not the quality. It's not the if it sounds good to people. This is purely the technical foundation on which stereo imaging and sound staging is built. That's what we are referring to. Absolutely good point.
You cannot have a 100 Rand amplifier comparing to a 100,000 Rand amplifier in terms of sound staging. They are both the same.
Yes.
Because they cannot, either one can add or subtract from the fundamental information that's there.
Yes, and it's only timing and volume information, and even worse, it's relative timing information and relative volume information.
Exactly. It's relative.
Relative. It's not the absolute. It's just relative. There is no difference in a 1 watt 3 watt amplifier reproducing a soundstage and a 1,000 watt amplifier reproducing it at 1 watt. There may be quality differences. Absolutely, we're not disputing that, but that's not what this is about. Right. So
there's a good point. Go and reference if you're not okay with it. Go and Google the differences between absolute and relative in terms of a scientific definition. There are two different meanings there.
Absolutely. So, dear viewer and dear listener and dear reader of this, and by the way, a shout out to you guys at AV News. Love the fact that you make this content available on your website as well. Thank you very much. Much obliged.
Thank you for bringing a level of science to the religion of HiFi.
I really am trying to approach this in a way that people can digest. Yes, it's a lot of information. Yes, we ramble on for long times, but otherwise you do a disservice to the foundation of what all of this is built on. And hopefully it'll give people time to pause and reconsider how they evaluate all of these things. And hopefully it'll contribute to their arsenal in the enjoyment and the understanding, because I firmly believe that the understanding of sound staging is important in the enjoyment thereof, because that will tell you don't need to change your 10 grand amp for 100 grand amp just to be able to get a soundstage. Hopefully it will. Does the 100 grand amp soundstage sound better to some people? Yes, it will. To other people, no, it won't. But that's irrelevant to the fact that there is a soundstage in the first place. So with that, I can certainly conclude and say thank you very much. And
thank you, sir.
People will find this interesting. Please, there's the subscribe, AV News, and the YouTube channel. And William, once again, thank you very much. Much appreciated, my friend.
Wonderful, sir.
It is most enjoyable to me, and hopefully our viewers and audience will enjoy this as much. please comment in
Fantastic.
if you've got anything. We'd like to engage.
Alrighty.
All good.
See you.
Have a good
Bye.
afternoon and a weekend.